You know that thing where you get an amazing pair of shoes at a really great price and want to tell everyone about it? Yeah, so do we. Here at Designer Shoe Warehouse, we'll give you something to brag about, like the latest styles from brands you love, or the trends everyone's obsessing over, or shoes that make you feel like, well, you. So go ahead, show off a little. Find shoes that get you at prices that get your budget. Head to your DSW store or dsw.com today. DSW, let us surprise you.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Fresh Take from What Fresh Hell Laughing in the Face of Motherhood. This is Amy. Today, I'm talking to Sarah Gristwood. She is a biographer, historian, and broadcaster committed to publicizing women's experiences in history. A former film journalist contributing to The Guardian, The Times, and The Telegraph, Sarah now broadcasts regularly for Sky News, CNN, and the BBC on royal and historical affairs. She is the author of several books, including the one we're going to talk about today, Secret Voices, A Year of Women's Diaries. Welcome, Sarah.
Lovely to be here.
I want to start with a quote from your book, from the introduction. You say that the diary has historically been an echo chamber for a woman's own voice as opposed to what she was supposed to say. So explain what the difference is.
Yeah, I think we see that very much, particularly in the diaries from the past. And this book covers diarists over 400 years. So it's almost that if if I were to pick one single feeling coming out of these diaries, it's frustration. It can be expressed as a kind of wry humour, but time and time again, women are effectively venting a bit about the kind of angers, ambitions that nice young ladies, or even not so young ladies, in their day were not supposed to feel, let alone say.
Were you surprised by that in your research, that frustration would be the thing that 400 years together?
Yes, I think perhaps I would. Having said that, frustration makes it sound negative, and it's not. All of these women were using the challenges they faced to fight in some way and to move the fight on for the rest of us. I mean, there's a huge amount of pleasure and humour there, as well as anger. But the diary was where they could say that they wanted more than their society was giving them, or that they didn't always feel the men around them were right.
Diaries are so interesting as a form of writing because some diarists, including the diarists in this book, some are writing very much with an intended audience in mind. And some are with an imaginary audience of one, maybe. And then some, I think, really were just writing for themselves, never imagining that it would be of interest. What are the sort of different motivations that would cause a woman 400 years ago to write something just for herself?
Yeah. As you say, some of the diaries was for just the diaries to the degree they were actually written in code. Anne Lister, the young Beatrix Potter, we all know her as the author of Peter Rabbit, but as a teenager, as a young woman, she wrote a diary in a code that was only cracked after her death. But 400 years ago, well, there's two diarists really who go that far back in the book. And one of them was writing, Lady Margaret Hoby, was writing as a kind of spiritual exercise, a kind of religious thing almost. But the other, Anne Clifford, if you look at what she was writing about, she was writing about her quarrels with her husband, the progress of her child, but her determination never to give up. She kept saying, I will never give up Westmoreland, by which she meant her own inherited lands in the county of Westmoreland, which both her father and the king and her husband were trying to persuade her to hand over, and she wouldn't do it. There's frustration and determination there, all right.
And did someone 400 years ago think this is a journal that's worth preserving for history, or was it a happenstance that it was preserved all these years?
Well, That woman, Anne Clifford, was a great landowner. So she was, a titled woman. So her diary was preserved in the archives in her own castles. So the fact is that preserving diaries has historically, inevitably, tended to favour the rich or the famous, women from the professional and the upper classes. But a lot of work's being done now very deliberately to try and recover voices from women in other walks of life. So I've got a Victorian maidservant. There are the pioneer with the wagon women crossing America, a dweller in the Rio favelas, a slum dweller. So there are other voices in there, even though it took a bit more work to find them.
You made that point in the introduction that having the literacy and the time and the privacy, those things go with privilege, even for women at home. And so was it hard to find these voices? How much work was that to find sort of the non-landed gentry sort of voices?
You do have to work a lot harder. They are out there now. Some of them have been published. Some of archives, university libraries have been putting work online. But it is a lot more effort. It would have been a lot easier just to do an entire anthology of people like Queen Victoria, Beatrix Potter, Virginia Woolf, Sylvia Plath, all of those whose diaries were known to be valuable. Or the wives of, famous men, the wives, sisters, daughters, whose work also tended to get preserved. But other voices are there. And I was very, very keen to try and make as representative as possible a picture of women's experience.
I wanted to ask you about Anne Lister, because for those people who might be listening, she was the feature, her journals were the feature of a HBO series called Gentleman Jack. I think it was a BBC series that became an HBO series. Really good. I've definitely recommended it to our listeners before. And so she was living as a lesbian, sometimes even dressed in male clothing, and kept journals, but kept them in code. So it seems to me that the stakes were so high that what she'd be writing about not be found out, and yet she needed to write it. What do you think was motivating her, even though the stakes were so high?
I think that's it, that she very definitely couldn't speak her views, her feelings in her society, other, of course, than to the few women who were her lovers, but not to her family, not to her contemporaries. And she was a woman of very decided views. She was a woman of wealth, controlling her own lands and monies. But nonetheless, in this aspect of her life, she had to keep it so private that I can absolutely see why she needed that diary as an outlet. After all, she could speak about her lovers, her female lovers there, about her qualms even. She could say things to her diary that she could say to absolutely nobody else. And she admitted that. She said it was a great relief to her. There was one time she'd been staying away with a female lover, but the other woman had become embarrassed about Anne's masculine appearance, about people's comments in the streets. Anne said she'd put it down in her journal, she'd written this down, and now she felt better. I think that was the purpose of diary writing for so many women.
I'm talking to Sarah Gristwood. She is the author of Secret Voices, A Year of Women's Diaries, and we'll be right back. Hellions, it's time for some spring cleaning, and I don't just mean the coat closets. Doing your financial spring cleaning can actually be super easy when you let Monarch do your financial spring cleaning for you. One dashboard that gets your entire financial life organized. No more clutter, no more mess, no more logins scattered everywhere, just accounts, investments, property, and more, all in one place. Get your first year of Monarch for half off, just $50 with promo code FRESH. Monarch allows you to look not only at what you've already spent, but also to plan for the future. With Monarch, you can set savings goals, plan for big purchases, and notice spending trends before they become a problem. I can generate cash flow reports that show me what we spent this quarter, this month, what we're probably going to spend next month, and feel prepared, organized, and knowing how to plan for the future. No more surprises and a lot more clarity. Try Monarch. Use code FRESH at monarch.com to get your first year half off at just $50. That's 50% off your first year at monarch.com with code FRESH. All my kids learned to swim when they were little. It was super important to me that they be confident and safe in the water. There was only one problem with that: taking them to swim lessons. I mean, the pools were freezing. There were always cranky adults doing laps right there. And it was definitely not, for any of us, what you would call fun.
Amy, heard. But now there's Goldfish Swim School. Goldfish takes a really thoughtful approach to swim lessons, combining research-based teaching with a warm, kid-friendly environment that actually helps kids thrive in the water.
Every detail at Goldfish is thoughtfully designed to create a golden experience, from shiver-free, warm indoor pools to comfy waiting areas for parents to professionally trained lifeguards on deck.
Goldfish uses an approach called the science of swim play, which combines guided play with proven teaching techniques to help kids learn to swim, build water safety skills, and gain confidence, all at their own pace. Lessons are designed to meet kids exactly where they're at.
If you've been thinking about swim lessons or just wondering where to start, this is a great opportunity. Right now, Goldfish Swim School is offering a waived membership plus your child's first lesson free at participating locations.
Just visit goldfishswimschool.com/free to find a location near you and enroll using promo code FREE.
That's goldfishswimschool.com/free, promo code FREE. Sarah, I wanted to ask you also about probably the most famous diarist who's included in this book, Anne Frank. I just had the incredible opportunity to see in Amsterdam the rooms where she was held and where she wrote the diary. And they gave a presentation there that really sort of opened my eyes. I had sort of, as a school child reading this book, been led to believe it was just the musings of a schoolgirl that, became this beautiful work of art. But who could have predicted, certainly not Anne Frank, that her words would be remembered? And yet when you go through, they make it pretty clear on the tour that she intended that this be a record that would be something she would publish someday. She was quite intentional about it.
Yes, she was. I agree. And on two different fronts, I think. On the one hand, she did know that she was living in exceptional circumstances, in exceptional times. But she was also very keen, I think, just to record herself, her identity. She apparently very definitely did want to be a writer, had she lived. And of course, it's the tragic circumstances that have made her diary so very famous. But I like to think we'd have known the name Anne Frank even without that.
So let's talk about the structure of the book. Explain the structure of the book and how you brought all these different women's diaries together.
Well, it is literally a year of women's diaries going through the calendar year, January 1st, January 2nd. And on each day, there's a selection of the women who, over the centuries, have written on that day. So on the same day, you could have, a funny entry, a tragic one, a slightly grumpy one complaining how boring everything is, right across the years, of course. And there you see both great differences, things written, descriptions you'd never make now. But then you also see how across the centuries, women's reactions often echo each other to a really surprising degree.
What made an entry to you worthy of consideration to be included on a certain day?
Well, of course, in the end, I was trying chiefly to do two things. One was to give, insofar as I could, a representative picture of women and what they've written about, and, of course, to make a readable book. I mean, it's a slight problem, or let's say challenge, for the editor, the anthologist, that a lot of women, and they acknowledge this, go to their diary especially when they are frustrated, grumpy, in distress. Some of them actually say, well, when things are going well, I don't need the diary so much. But I didn't want to make it a misery memoir, so I was, again, trying to get a reasonable balance of pleasures and pains.
And then there are some women who in their diary, even when something really important happens, it's this sort of polite underplaying of things.
Yes.
I'm going to read one entry that I absolutely loved. Somebody named Ivy Jacquier wrote this 200 years ago, 1922. She said on the 24th of January, she said, Sarah Sophie Jacquier Skinner, born at 2:20 a.m., much better than losing an appendix. Dr. Moore Eade was a gem. I enjoyed the experience. That's how she records her own daughter's birth.
Yes, totally. And yet one of the entries that most interests me is also about children, and indeed she wrote about childbirth. That's from Elizabeth Fry, the Quaker and prison reformer, writing 200 years ago, literally in the early 19th century, and writing about how, after she put it, the experience she'd just undergone, childbirth in the days before anaesthetics, that she'd had difficulty bonding with her new baby. And that must be an experience. The phrase postnatal depression obviously wasn't known then, but the phenomenon clearly was. And that same woman, Elizabeth Fry, wrote on another occasion about how she worried that her husband and children, I think it was 11 children, distracted her too much from what she felt was her mission, her vocation, the reform of prison conditions, and how if she spent too much time on that, the husband and children got jealous. And you think, well, combining work and family, that's a challenge. It certainly hasn't gone away, but I didn't expect to find it 200 years ago.
It's so interesting. And these days, that would be something you would talk to your therapist about, I suppose, or you might write about it in your Substack. But in these times, the only possible outlet was your diary.
And I really honour her for acknowledging it, even just in the diary at that point and at that time.
Even to admit something like that to yourself would have been scary, I suppose. Let's talk about Sophia Tolstoy, the wife of Leo Tolstoy. Her diary entries are throughout the book, and she really got put through it. Will you tell us a little bit about her?
She totally did. I use, I think, one entry from her marrying, the great author when she was a very young girl. But many of the entries come from the end of Tolstoy's, the author's, life. And she's written over the years about the massive difficulties of caring for him as his health worsened, about how she used to get pleasure and release in playing the piano, but now she couldn't even do that because the noise disturbed him. And then, in the very last months of Tolstoy's life, she was at war with the agent, the publisher, who she felt was taking over Tolstoy's life and turning him against her. And in the end, in the last weeks of his life, her husband even left the house, ran away, and no one would even tell her where he was. And it is the most extraordinary picture, both of the breakdown of a marriage and of the way that this herself talented woman's life did wind up being completely subsumed by his. So on the one hand, there's the kind of one-off experience most of us don't have, being the wife of a genius and, a world-famous author. But on the other, I was caring for my own husband at this time I was doing this book. And I found so many little things, about the endless ups and downs of the, of his health and so on, so very relatable that no, those diaries were quite extraordinary to me.
And sometimes as a reader, centuries later, the things that jump out at you are perhaps not what the diarist thought was interesting. I have had the privilege of reading my grandmother's diary from 100 years ago when she was a child. It's mostly over the summer that she spent working at her own grandparents' farm, a chore that she loathed, being sent to live with them for the summer. And it's just small details of what happened with the animals on the farm that day that she was apologizing as she's writing. Well, there's nothing to talk about. A cow was born today, big whoop. But of course, to you reading it, it's an incredible detail. Did you find many details like that as you were reading, things that the diarist didn't think were significant, but definitely were?
Yes, totally. I mean, one was the famous ladies of Llangollen, two 18th century spinsters who went away to live together, to the complete shock of their horror of their families. And Lady Eleanor Butler, she was just writing, to let nothing much happen today, went into the orchard, gathered apples, went into the parlour for frizzing and powdering, that operation concluded. And of course, to her, it must have felt just like me writing, washed my hair, who cares, who's interested? But now, frizzing and powdering, you think, oh, goodness.
It must have taken 2 hours, right? You want to go back and see exactly what it was.
I know. Yes, exactly that. Yes, a big deal. And one example that isn't in the book, because A, it's much too long, but also it was written up afterwards, a famous diarist, Fanny Burney, in her diaries and journal letters, she wrote about the experience in detail for pages, the experience of undergoing an unanesthetized mastectomy. And that you do think, well, some things haven't changed, but some things have, and thank heavens for it.
I'm talking to Sarah Gristwood. She is the author of Secret Voices, A Year of Women's Diaries, and we'll be right back.
Amy, when I'm having a good hair day, it usually makes my whole day better. And that's why on every day, I'm taking Nutrafol.
Nutrafol is the #1 dermatologist-recommended hair growth supplement brand, and it's the #1 hair growth supplement brand personally used by dermatologists. Nutrafol's hair growth supplements are peer-reviewed, NSF certified for sport, and clinically tested.
Nutrafol offers multiple formulas for men and women, tailored to different life stages and lifestyle factors, so you get support that's actually right for you. Adding Nutrafol to your daily routine is easy. Order online, no prescription needed, with automated deliveries and free shipping to keep you on track.
Let your hair be one less thing to worry about. See visibly thicker, stronger, faster-growing hair in 3 to 6 months with Nutrafol.
For a limited time, Nutrafol is offering our listeners $10 off your first month subscription and free shipping when you visit Nutrafol.com and enter promo code LAUGHING.
That's Nutrafol.com, spelled Nutrafol.com, promo code LAUGHING. My favorite skincare products actually feel more like self-care, like they're so nice to put on and they smell so good that I'm actually happy when I get to that part of my day. And I swear that is how I feel about Osea's anti-aging body balm.
Amy, you are usually the lotions and potions queen on this podcast, but I have to say, hard agree.
Osea's anti-aging body balm is a liquid silk body balm that combines the lasting hydration of a lotion with the firming power of a serum, leaving skin smoother and firmer.
This body balm is clinically tested and designed to deliver visible results you can see and feel.
So we've gotten to use this product for a couple of months now, and I swear I have really noticed firmer and smoother skin, like on the back of my hands. It's like getting a mini spa treatment from head to toe.
Get a spring-worthy glow with clean, clinically tested skincare from Osea. And right now, we have a special discount just for our listeners.
Get 10% off your first order site-wide with code FRESH at OseaMalibu.com.
That's 10% off your first order with code FRESH at OSEAMalibu.com.
Sarah, I wanted to know what you think can be gained by understanding these women's voices, sort of in aggregate, seeing them in juxtaposition and in aggregate like this. What is to be gained as an understanding of history, of women, or both?
I think a lot, and more than I'd expected at first. On the one hand, of course, there is just the historical record, because very often the voices of women do tend to get left out. History, certainly if you go back more than a couple of hundred years, tends to be about battles and laws and politics. And until fairly recently, women couldn't take part in those, so they weren't recorded. But far more strongly, to me, it was that sense of community with women from the quite distant past. And the fact that they were often, like Elizabeth Fry, juggling work and family, fighting the same battles we are, and that they survived. And indeed, collectively, moved the game on to where we are today. I think what I unexpectedly really got from reading these women's diaries was a sense of support, that very often we women of the last half century or so have felt a bit like frontline troops, have felt that we were fighting some battles, or at least our mothers were, for the first time, and in a bit of a vacuum. In fact, reading these women's diaries, looking at some of the actual causes in which they engaged, whether it was suffrage or abolition, you feel as if there's a whole army of foremothers standing at our back. And there's a lot of strength in that.
The idea that 200 years ago there could be a mother worrying she doesn't love her baby enough, right? Or that Anne Frank is going through the Holocaust and she's worried about, is she pretty and does the boy like her? That both can coexist, right? The very personal and the very grand.
Yes, exactly that. Yes, I found that time and again. There's one entry from Virginia Woolf writing in 1918 about nothing much had happened that day, has to be noted for three things: talk of peace, a first visit to the 17 Club, and the breaking of her tortoiseshell spectacles. Then she said, as for the talk of peace, which is, after all, the most important, but it's pretty obvious that the tortoiseshell spectacles are right up there on the forefront of her mind.
She at least knew to put world peace first on the list, right? But also my glasses. But it still counts as history. History has left out women's daily lives. And diaries are sort of all we have to understand what they were like. And what can we gain by understanding women's diaries as history?
No, totally. I agree that women's daily lives have been left out. Partly, of course, because history and, until comparatively recently, most literature has been largely written by men. So I do think it is vitally important to do exactly that, for us to see what was on women's minds. I mean, that Lady Anne Clifford I mentioned from 400 years back was writing about how she'd never give up her lands, about how the anniversary of Elizabeth I's death, but she was also writing, today for the first time I dressed my head without pins, and how the child put on a pair of whalebone bodices. Today, the child spent the night with her, which, of course, a great lady's child wouldn't normally do at that point. So it is exactly what is on people's minds, and the link between the two, the great events and the small ones.
Do you think that diaries are... I was going to ask, do you think they're necessary in the same way today? I do think they're necessary, but do you think that they're being created in the same way today? And is it a problem if they're not?
Yes and no. I think there is, of course, a trend in a way for journaling, not necessarily writing every day, but in a sense, the diaries maybe had a wobble and has come back to full strength. But I do think we also do have to take on board different forms of expression now. I think things like social media, on the face of it, may seem very different from the diary private, social media. Well, it's all in the name, isn't it? But on the other hand, for writing down the minutiae of what's happened to you today, where do we turn to? Well, often to X or to Facebook or Instagram. And even sometimes for recording unpopular opinions. So I think we may have to, in the future, look on the diary form a bit more widely. But that said, I think it'll still stay strong.
So explain to our listeners where they can find you and your work, and then we'll tell them a little bit more about the book.
Well, on social media, indeed, and I'm always there just under my own name, at Sarah Gristwood or whatever.
Tell our listeners about this book, why you wrote it, and why you think these diaries are worth engaging with in this way.
Because traditionally, women's diaries haven't had nearly so much as a look-in as men's have, but it's been the place where women could speak the truth to themselves and now to us. That truth can sometimes be funny, tragic, furious, or just plain factual. But it's worth reading, so worth reading in all its glorious variety.
And I will put the links to buying Secret Voices in the show notes for this episode, as well as Sarah's social media. I loved this book, Secret Voices, A Year of Women's Diaries. It's the perfect book also to kind of put down, pick up again, keep with you as you go through the year. These women's lives are so different from our own, and yet they're really not so much sometimes. Sarah, thank you so much for being with me today.
Thank you.